Hello, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. My name is Ariella Coombs, and I'm a career coach here at Work Daily, and I'm super excited to be here today and answer your questions. So today, in honor of Halloween, happy Halloween, by the way, I wanted to go over a topic that I constantly get inside our platform, which is about networking connections ghosting you. Okay, so fun little theme there, but also something that we constantly get in our platform. So I wanted to kind of give you some ideas and reasons why this is happening so you can adjust your approach a little bit. But we'll also be taking questions at the end of that kind of topic discussion. And that can be anything from your job search problems to career planning. If you're trying to get a promotion, if you're trying to get interviews, you're having trouble with your resume and cover letter. Cover letters are my forte, so bring on the cover letter questions. I love it. Welcome to everybody who is just joining us here today. If you do have a question, please put in your question into the chat, but make sure the question part is all in caps so that way we can find it easier. So that way you have a better chance of getting your question answered. I will try to my best to answer all of your questions, but sometimes we get so many people in here and we only have 30 minutes to do this. So I can't always answer your question, but if you want guaranteed answers to your questions about your job search or career, definitely join us inside of our platform and work it daily. It's only, it's only like $25 a month. And we have a special code for you at the end of this if you want to join us. Okay. We'll have more information inside the chat if you want to learn more about that. Okay. So let's get started here. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole ghosting process. A lot of people seem to be running into this, and I want to kind of explain why this is happening, and so you can change your approach a little bit. So what is ghosting, first off? So ghosting, if you're not familiar with the term, is something that happens when someone abruptly stops communication with you. You could be talking with them, or you could have just started a conversation, but then they just go off the radar, never to be heard from again. And it's frustrating, naturally. Obviously, you're having a good conversation, or you thought, this conversation was going somewhere that you could start establishing a good networking relationship with this person, and then they just drop off the face of the earth. And, what the heck happened? So this is something that people constantly come to us with and just frustrated. Why aren't these people getting back to me? I thought we had a good conversation going. What's going on? Okay. So let me explain. So first thing, I want you guys to realize this. People are extremely busy, and to go out of their way to help a stranger is a huge commitment. I know it doesn't sound like it, but it actually is. When you have kids, you have other obligations, family members, and you just have a ton of things going on in your life in addition to your work. So it's a big commitment to, even just messaging somebody back sometimes can be a lot. Okay. So when you have so much on your plate, it's a little bit more, it feels more like an obligation that you probably can't fit on your plate. So please keep that in mind and be sensitive to that, because, these days people are busy, and especially where you don't have a relationship with them. If you're just meeting them, or you're inviting them to connect on LinkedIn, you are, remember, probably their last priority, even if they want to help you. Okay. So please keep that in mind. So the other thing to remember is that not everybody's on LinkedIn, as much as you and me. So I'm in there every single day, and you probably are in there pretty regularly too. But there are people out there who just have LinkedIn because they feel like they need to have it, and they're only checking it periodically. So that means they might not see your messages. Even if they have a conversation going with you, they probably, it's probably not on their radar. Okay. So please keep that in mind, that they might not have seen your messages. So don't take offense if you don't hear back from them, pretty quickly. Okay. So those are the two things I like to tell everybody. First off, people are busy, and they're probably not in LinkedIn, as often as they could be. So keep that in mind and be sensitive to that. The other reasons that you could be getting ghosted, include you're going in and you're asking for something right away. And that's a huge turnoff. So if you connected with somebody on LinkedIn and you, instead of going in for a conversation and asking them about themselves, their work, their company, and all that stuff, asking them about them, you're going in and saying, hey, it's great to meet you. I was wondering if you could help me get a job at your company. It's like, well, that's probably not going to work necessarily, because again, you're a stranger to them in most cases, and they're already busy. They're already their plates are already full. So this just feels like a big obligation and they don't trust you yet. And so if you're going in and you're asking for things too early in the process, they might just, shut down and say, nope, this person clearly doesn't want to get to know me. They don't understand, how this kind of works. Like they want to build a conversation and build a base with you first before you go in and go for the ask. So if you're getting shut down, take a look at what you're asking people in your conversations. How are you approaching that? Are you going in and asking for help in the application process right away? Are you asking them about themselves and their company and their work and starting a real genuine conversation to learn about, the company and what they do there? Because people love talking about themselves. And even if it's like 5 minutes in the day, if someone's like, oh, I can share exactly what I do and why I love my company and what my company is about, they might be more receptive to that conversation versus, hey, can you pass my resume along to HR, even though you have no idea who I am? It's not necessarily going to work that way. Okay. So keep that in mind and just evaluate and see what you're putting out there. And if you're asking for things, if it just feels like, oh my gosh, if someone asked me to do this, if a stranger asked me to do this, how would I react? Okay. Would I feel like, oh my gosh, there's a huge weight on my shoulders and I just don't know if I can, do this. Do I have time for this? I don't know this person. Okay. So keep that in mind. The other thing you want to keep in mind is your follow-up time. Okay. So if you met somebody at a networking event, for example, and you didn't follow up on LinkedIn immediately, you didn't send them a message saying, it was so great to meet you. I want to learn more about your company, yada, yada, yada. They might not be as receptive when you reach out to them 2 months later and they have no idea who you are, how you met, or, they might just be embarrassed because they could recognize you or your face. They could recognize your name, but they might not know where they know you. So please keep that in mind. It's so important especially when you're making those connections in the real world. If you're going to a networking event, if you're going to a business function and you've connected with them on LinkedIn, make sure you send them a note. So that way you have a thread, a conversation. So that way, if you reach out in 2 months and start asking them questions and so on, they know exactly who you are. Okay. So I'm going to share a story. This actually just happened to me. I try to make a point to do this every time I meet somebody at a networking event. I connect with them on LinkedIn. If we had a great conversation and I send them a message, and it's honestly for my own benefit, because that way, if I go back, if I need to reach out to them, or if they reach out to me, I'll know exactly where we met, what we talked about, and so on. So that way it's kind of like my own little history so I can see, what that connection was. And this just happened to me. Someone sent me a message recently about, yeah, let's get together. Let's do this. And I'd love to learn more about this and this and this. I had no idea who this person was. I knew we were connected on LinkedIn, but I didn't know anything else. And so I was a little embarrassed because I didn't know when was the last time we chatted. What did we chat about? How do I know this person? And thankfully I scrolled up in my messages and I found my message to this person talking exactly about that. So where we met, what we talked about, what we have in common, that kind of stuff. So that was super helpful for me. And it's very important for both sides of the party, or like both parties, right? So that way, you're not if you take too long, or if you connect down the line, you at least have that communication. If you don't, and if you wait too long, the person's probably going to feel a little embarrassed or have no idea who you are, and they're probably not going to be as receptive to your messages. Okay, so if you're getting ghosted, think about your follow-up strategy. Okay. All right. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to touch on was you're not keeping that conversation going. Okay. If you're not getting any messages, if people are stopping communication with you after a couple of messages, think about how are you keeping that conversation going? Are you asking questions? Are you, genuinely interested in what they have to say? A mistake I see a lot of times is that people send messages and they just kind of answer questions, but they don't ask any questions back. So the other person is probably not feeling compelled to answer you if there's no question to, answer, right? Or they don't have anything to add. So it's important that you kind of encourage that conversation to keep going by always ending on a question. Okay, whether it's a question about what they do, their work, their company, other things about them that have in common. keep that conversation going, because if you don't end on a question, if there's no reason for them to respond, they probably won't, because remember, people are busy. So if there's no kind of encouragement for them to respond to your messages, they may not. Okay. So those would be some of the reasons that you are getting ghosted on LinkedIn and in your networking efforts. Please take these reasons and see how you can adjust your approach. Okay. Because networking is the best way to get a job that you love, in fact. So it's so important to continue your networking efforts. Just make sure that you are keeping these things in mind so you can adjust your networking strategy. Okay. All right. So now that I have that out of the way, let's get to some questions. Okay. All righty. Okay, question. My background is accounting/finance. I cannot work before 2020. When should I start my job search? What month? So good question. So what I would say is you should start networking. Start figuring out what companies you're interested in, what companies you have a connection with, whether it's a product or service that they have to offer and you can relate to that, or you've used it or something that connects you with that, or there are companies in your area that you respect their mission, what they're trying to do. You share values and beliefs, something that connects you with those companies. Make a list of your top 10 in your area. Okay. So start to get organized. Even though it's a little ways off, it can take time to get a job, but you want to start building that foundation early. And that foundation includes that networking, that strategic networking. Okay. So figure out that top 10 list of your companies and start networking your way into those companies. Okay. Start having conversations, inviting people to connect on LinkedIn, inviting people out for coffee so you can learn more about the company. The more people in those organizations who can vouch for you when the time comes, the better your shot at getting those opportunities. Okay. Also, get clear on your top skill sets. Figure out how to market yourself and brand yourself. Okay. Get on LinkedIn. Figure out a way to showcase your expertise, whether it's writing blog posts, getting on YouTube, doing a video about talking about your, how you solve the problem that you solve in accounting and finance. Start branding yourself online. So that way, when people search for you, they'll have a clear understanding of who you are, how you add value, and what your skill sets are. Okay, so it's never too early to start your job search, or at least building that foundation for a good job search, because it can take time. And if you have those networking connections in place and you've built that brand and you have a strategic kind of framework to go for, if you're going for certain companies, it's going to be so much easier when the time comes to get those jobs. Okay. All right. All right. Question. What can you do when you apply for a mid-level position that you think you're a good fit for, but get eliminated for being considered at the senior level for a role? Be eliminated for being considered at the senior level for the role. Okay, so if I'm understanding this question correctly, I'm assuming this means you probably were labeled as overqualified for this particular mid-level role based on your experience. If I'm incorrect, please let me know. So if you're overqualified if they're saying that you're overqualified or they're eliminating you because of your past experience, please keep in mind that, there are some other factors going on here. So, if there were salary ranges being tossed around and, you were expecting a certain salary range, or they assume that you were expecting a certain salary range based on your prior experience, that could be a factor. Overqualified sometimes means I don't want to pay for this person who I can hire somebody cheaper to do the same thing. The other thing is you're overqualified could also mean, you have older experience, but maybe you don't have the most relevant experience for this type of role. Okay, so you could have a really lengthy resume and a lot of experience in the field, but again, they could assume that it's going to be pricey to hire you for this type of role, and your experience is probably a better fit for those higher level roles. And they can hire somebody who's cheaper, who has more relevant recent skill sets that they can bring to the table in that position. So just keep that in mind. Salary is such a big thing to understand early on in the process because, if it starts with that phone screen, right? So if they're screening out candidates, they might ask you what your expectations are or what your previous salary is or something like that. And you want to be prepared to have an answer there. But, to say something like, this is based on my research, these are the ranges that I was looking at, and these are the competitive rates for this type of role in this location and so on. If they ask you about your former salary, you want to say, well, I made this much in my last role, but I understand that things change. And I know that this particular role might not have those particular ranges. So based on my research, this is what I'm kind of expecting, and so on. So you want to be prepared for that because that typically can hurt you in the process. If you're expecting to make what you made in your last role, you might be labeled as overqualified, or you might not be a fit for that, mid-level role when you were previously a senior role. So I hope that helps if I understood that question correctly. All right. All right, question. Is it acceptable or appropriate to share work from a previous company I developed that is considered confidential? So I actually just answered a question like this in our platform this morning. So if they're asking for examples of, or information from previous work to just kind of showcase what you've done, you first want to see if you can, remove the information for the, that you can't share. If you can't do that and it doesn't really make sense with the information, you just say, unfortunately, that information is, confidential. I can't really share it. Is there any other way that I can, prove to you that I had this experience? Okay. All right. Question. Okay. Is it okay to talk about having older children and raising them as experience toward a job? Not one that's in the education or childcare or anything like that. So you can, it depends. So if you're a primary caregiver, for example, and you need to be there for your family or your children, if they're experiencing kind of issues and they need that assistance, you can put that on your resume. Absolutely. Just to show that it's not that you're sitting around on the couch, you're actually doing something and you need to be there for your family. And most employers understand that. Okay. But the important thing is, so you can list that as, primary caregiver, between these dates. Okay. For a family member or something like that. You don't even have to go into too much detail there. If you really need to fill a gap, the thing that to keep in mind is that if there's anything else you can do to keep your skills relevant during that time period, part-time work, volunteering, online courses, certifications, anything like that to show that you are still keeping your skills relevant, that's key. But if you need to put something on there as like primary caregiver, just to kind of fill a gap, that's fine. If it doesn't relate to your type of role that you're going for, you can put that in additional experience, or you can just put it on your work history to just, again, fill that gap. But if it does relate to your work, if you were in education or childcare or anything like that, you can list that and you can list off, relevant, I don't want to say accomplishments, but relevant information to showcase that you are, working and, doing that kind of stuff, because it is work, right? In that case. So you want to make sure that you can address that to them. And like, if you're trying to fill that gap, that's a great way to do that. All right. Okay. Great question. I'm super excited about this one. Just had an informational interview with an employee of an organization I really like. I couldn't figure out how to ask, I want to work with you. How to shift that conversation from general conversation to the ask of, how to work with you. Okay, so great question. So if you have a good connection, if you got a good conversation going, and you're feeling like you've established trust, you understand the company, they understand, that person understands you and how you can add value, and they like you. If you feel like it's in a good place, you can follow up and say, I really had, a great time chatting with you today. I learned so much. It was really great to learn specifically about, X, Y, and Z. Bring in an example from your conversation to show that you were genuinely interested in listening, and say something like, it would be an honor to represent your company. I would love to work there one day based on the information that you shared and based on my own research. Based on that, based on what you learned about me, is there anything, do you have any advice for me in terms of, how I should move forward here? How can I get my foot in the door? Okay. So this is different. So if you have a conversation, you're feeling like there's good trust there, they understand who you are, and, you feel like it's going really well, you can go in and ask for some advice. Okay. But you just don't want to start with that. So that's what I was getting across earlier, or trying to get across earlier. So you don't want to just go in and say, hey, we just met and I'd love some advice on how to, apply to your company, without even having a conversation first. So if you have that conversation and you follow up and say, thank you so much for meeting with me today. It was so great to learn more about your company, what you do. It was great to learn about this specific thing. And based on that conversation, I would love to, work there one day. I would be honored to be a part of that team. And, do you have any advice for me in terms of how to move forward in that process? And that can be your gateway to, getting an introduction, or them giving you advice on your resume or passing it along. You don't want to ask specifically for those things just yet, but see if they're open to the idea of giving you that advice. Great question. All right. Question. I work in HR. I think the reason I'm not getting interviews is because my experience is in one industry. How can I get recruiters to understand that HR is basically the same in all industries? Great question. So what you want to do is highlight those transferable skill sets. Okay, so what we teach inside Work It Daily is that you need to be thinking about your top 10 technical skill sets. So they can be skill sets that relate directly to your work, or transferable skill sets, the skills that apply across industries. Okay, and in this case, if you're having trouble, you really want to showcase those transferable skill sets. All right, especially where there's so many that are out there that people don't realize how many skill sets they actually have until they see it on a piece of paper. Okay, and they're like, wow, I do have a project management experience. I do public speaking experience, and so on and so on. So what you want to do is essentially, there are tons of, we actually have a skills table inside our program that lists a bunch of transferable skill sets, but essentially you want to think about those transferable skills, and I'm sure you can find a list online of those things. Make a list of those skills, figure out which ones that you have based on your career and your experience, and then showcase those in your branding. Showcase it on your LinkedIn profile, on your resume, and so on. So that way you're optimizing for those transferable skill sets. You're showing recruiters that you do have experience that can translate to other areas and other jobs, and that you've used it in the past. So the key here is to figure out what those skill sets are, and then go back into your work experience and figure out what kinds of projects or accomplishments that you had in those roles that back up those skill sets. Okay, so for example, project management, great transferable skill set. An accomplishment that you could showcase would be, I managed 10 projects over the course of 6 months, and and so on. So you just kind of list out an experience, a project or accomplishment that relates and ties directly to that transferable skill set. So that way you're not just slapping those skill sets on your profile and on your resume, you're backing them up in your work history. So that way they can look at those skill sets and say, okay, well, they say that they have the skills. I'm gonna go down to their work history and I'm gonna see if they actually use those skill sets in their work. Okay, and this is going to be a great way for you to market your skill sets and your experience to a bunch of different roles across industries. Okay, so think about those transferable skill sets. They're so, so important. All right. Question. Ooh, cover letters. Question. For cover letters, should you use keywords from the actual posting and pass the ATS? Great question. So actually, the keywords are really, you want to apply those to your resume. So again, talking about those key technical skill sets that you have based on your own experience and that you want to leverage in your next job. Think about those top skill sets and how they relate to that job, I typically tell people to go through the job description and circle all the obvious skill sets that they can see, make a list, and then say, okay, which skill sets did I miss? So that way it's super tailored to that job. You have the right skill sets, you're showcasing the right information, and you're bringing other skill sets to the top of your resume or your profile if they're more relevant to that type of role. So your resume is really the place for you to have those keywords and those skill sets, because that's your qualification sheet, essentially. Your cover letter is essentially the voice to your resume, right? It says what your resume can't say. Your resume is that, what we say is like your highlight reel of your career. And it should just showcase your technical skill sets, any other qualifications you have that, relate to that role, and of course, your accomplishments, proof that you have those skill sets, right? Over in the cover letter side, that should be your story. That should be the reason you got into doing this work, the reason you would feel, proud to represent this company. So it's essentially more of a story of why you can add value there and why you'd be proud to work there. And that's really what's going to help you stand out in that hiring process, or that initial hiring process, that initial part. Okay, because you can have the same resume as somebody else, but if you have a really amazing, powerful cover letter that articulates your connection with the company, the problem that you solve, and how you've solved it in the past, and then why you'd be proud to solve that problem at that particular company, that's really going to be a game changer for you. Okay, so don't keyword stuff your cover letter, because that's not the purpose. The purpose is to make a connection with that recruiter, with that interviewer, with that hiring manager, and showcase that you would be proud to work there. It's not just about the money. It's about you connecting with that organization and honestly understanding that you have a place there because you already understand your value, you understand the problem that you solve, and you know where you'd fit in that organization. So that's going to help you stand out. Okay. So I love cover letters, so I could talk about this all day, but hopefully that helps. All right. Okay, question. In phone screening interviews, I tried to ask what range the company is paying. They say, I don't have that in front of me right now. I bet they know, but they aren't telling. How can I get them to tell me? So this is a great question. And our rule of thumb is never bring up salary first, okay? Because the reason is if they think that you are just in this opportunity for the money, they're going to say, they're going to assume, oh, well, they're not really interested in the work. Maybe they're not connected with this company, whereas this other candidate, super into what they do, super into the opportunity, and they feel connected to this organization. So they're going to stand out way more than this person who's just in it for the paycheck and might leave for a better opportunity that pays more. So we typically recommend that you don't bring it up first. And if it's not brought up in, to the way like final interviews, I'm sure a conversation will happen because obviously they know that this is a big, important thing. But at this point in the process, especially where it's just the beginning, it's a phone screen, you want to really focus on questions, surrounding the company and, how you'd fit in there and that kind of thing. You want to avoid that salary question because it can unfortunately hurt you in that process. Okay. So if they're saying they don't have that information in front of them, they probably know what they're going to pay, but you want to, again, push that off until later and see if they bring it up first before an offer is made. Okay. Great question. All right. I think I have time for one more question. Let's see. Okay, question. In my interview, the hiring manager said to check back with him in a week. The recruiter contacted and said they were needing 30 days to make a decision. Should I still touch a base with the hiring manager? Absolutely. Okay, if the hiring manager told you to check back with him in a week, you follow those instructions because it's important to keep contact. Even if they need more time to make that decision, just having that constant conversation with that person, especially where they ask you to do that, is so important. So just say something like, hi, I hope you're having a great week. I just want to check in to see how things are going with the X, Y, and Z role. It was so great to talk with you and learn more about this opportunity in your company. Is there anything else I can do to further my candidacy for this position? Please let me know. Just simple, easy, and it's a great way for you to keep that conversation. Now, you don't want to go over the top with your follow-up and your communication because it can look a little bit desperate and aggressive. So, if they give you a timeline, if they tell you when to follow up then. If they don't, give them a week or two or so and follow up with them. Always send a thank you note immediately, like 24 hours to 48 hours after that interview or after that conversation. But give them a week or so, between 1 week and 2 weeks, and then follow up and see how things are going. Okay. But in this case where they told you exactly when to follow up, go for it. Okay. Super important. Okay, so thank you guys so much. Time is out for today, but I hope this was educational and you learned a lot from today's session. Obviously, we do this every Wednesday from 1 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So definitely check that out. If you haven't already, please subscribe and follow us and like and put your comments in. It's always appreciated. And of course, if you want to get notified every time that we post a new video or have office hours, be sure to ring that little bell. Okay, and one last thing I wanted to mention was if you want to join us inside Work It Daily, please use the code office hours in all caps. That coupon code will give you $10 off of our monthly subscription. So it's definitely worth it. So definitely check it out. And we're putting more information into the chat right now. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a spooky Halloween and have a great rest of your week.